Hello again, my friends. I'm Bill, and you are watching Bill's Box of Sound. This video is a review of the brand new Frank Zappa release, released on June 30th, 2023, and it's called Funky Nothingness. Take a look at that. Yeah, it's got kind of a mirrored finish on it, and there's the back of it. Really nice. You can get, while you're looking at Frank, you can get a whole panorama of the record room here. And the inside of this has a really nice picture of Frank as well. Now, there is also a lot of great photographs in the album and also in the booklet that comes with the CD. Inside of here, not only do you have the tracks, but you've got great photographs of Frank and everybody else in the studio. These wonderful photos, except for the one photo of Sugarcane Harris, were taken by photographer John Williams. And while this does add a lot of good things to the whole packaging and enjoying the music while you're sitting back and listening to it, I have a small complaint about the cover and the design. Yes, I do like the mirrored part of it, but you know what? I miss Cal Schenkel like it's nobody's business. I mean, covers like this one, crazy artwork that really tunes into Frank's aesthetic. I mean, the Absolutely Free album artwork was done by Frank himself. And the next album that came along, We're Only In It For The Money, was done by Cal Schenkel. And it was like somebody had mind melded with Frank and knew what to put on that record cover. The relationship between Schenkel and Frank lasted as long as Frank was around, and Cal has even helped out with some record covers after Frank has passed away. Cal is still alive. He's still working. The people in charge at Universal and the Zappa camp really should consider having him do some work in the future. But I have nothing that I can do about it, except what I just did. Okay, back to the review. So, this is available either as a 2-record set, which is the main album that was originally conceived, and as a 3 CD set, which has 3 times the content. The first CD is the whole album, as the vinyl I just showed you, and the second and third CD are supplemental material. The record is available as black vinyl, as well as this translucent violet color, which kind of goes along with the album design as well. And if you order the violet version from the Zappa.com website, there's also this guitar pick, which has a picture of Frank on one side and the mustache with the release number on it. Ooh. You know, as I am shooting this on July the 5th, it sounds like the purple copies with the guitar pick are out of stock. There may be some other ones left on mail order. You never know. Also check your local record store. They may have copies of the vinyl on the translucent violet color. But if you want all the music, you may want to just pick up both the CD and the vinyl, because in my estimation, the vinyl does have a better sound to it. It's mastered by Chris Bellman at Bernie Grundman Mastering. But let's talk about this album. This album was recorded in 1970. It was recorded after this album was released, which was in 1969. And there was a basic band that was assembled for these sessions. We're talking about, of course, Frank Zappa on guitar and vocals. We've got Don Sugarcane Harris on vocals, electric violin, and keyboards. The amazing Ian Underwood on keyboards, sax, and rhythm guitar. And Max Bennett, who played on Hot Rats as well, on electric and acoustic bass. And the drummer for the whole set is the unbelievable Ainsley Dunbar, who would stay with Frank for a few years after this. So once these guys were assembled and recording at the record plant in 1970, they started putting together, recording what would eventually be an album. And they recorded more than an album's worth of material, several takes, and for some reason, this never got released. Why, you're asking? Well, it's possibly because soon after these sessions, Frank was introduced to and brought into the band Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, also known to us affectionately as Flo and Eddie. And they added something to his music that apparently was really missing at that time. Some people who could really sing. And some of the stuff that was recorded for Funky Nothingness ended up on this album, Chunga's Revenge. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. What was already laid down and kind of abandoned eventually did get chopped up and used for other recordings. I'm talking about stuff that's on here on Funky Nothingness ended up on things as wide-ranging as Apostrophe, and of course bits and pieces ended up on Chunga's Revenge. But most of this stuff is completely unreleased in any form. But you'll find little bits and pieces. Now, as an album on its own, Funky Nothingness is different than any other Zappa album. But then again, you can say that for just about any Zappa album. Frank was always recording, always exploring new territories, and always trying to put together new things. So let's talk about this album. It starts with Funky Nothingness. It's less than 2 minutes long, and it was recorded back in fall of 1967 during the sessions for Uncle Meat. And it was a bluesy piece that was originally the beginning of the Chunga's Revenge album, but was never used for that. It has Frank on acoustic lead guitar, Motorhead Sherwood on rhythm guitar, and Roy Estrada on bass, and Frank doing some vocals. Or, as it says in the liner notes, primordial grunts. We move on to something called Tommy Vincent Duo 1. Tommy is Ainsley Thomas Dunbar. Vincent is Frank Vincent Zappa. So that's where you get that from. They recorded a session of just the two of them jamming away. Frank on bass or guitar, and Ainsley doing what he does best, play them damn drums. And oh, does he play those damn drums wonderfully. This quick 45-second excerpt goes right into Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild, an original Zappa composition, and Sugarcane Harris does the lead vocals on this. It's a blues. And then after that track, it goes into I'm a Rolling Stone. Now, there have been many versions of this song. It's a blues standard. Guitar Slim did it. Muddy Waters did it. Very many people are credited with writing this song. And in this song, which goes on for 12 minutes and 20 seconds, and while you're listening to I'm a Rolling Stone, you may notice a certain similarity to the last song on one of Frank's most popular albums. Yeah, mostly the drums were stripped off of this and used to piece together the rhythm track for Stinkfoot. But the riff is pretty much Frank's own. And he's covering the song, adding all of his own pieces and parts, turning it into a new, old blues classic. You've got Frank doing his own take of it, moving the lyrics around, adding his own lyrics, and of course, the solos are plentiful. Frank takes at least 2 solos. And there's a solo that's dedicated to Sugarcane Harris on the violin, and he uses the wah-wah on that violin very wonderfully. And if you listen to the stereo spread, it's like the electric violin is all over the place. It's like it was mic'd acoustically, and it was also going through an amplifier, and maybe even 2 different amplifiers. So he's vibing along, vamping along with the song, and he gets his own solo as well in this fantastic, long, laid out blues number. And that's the end of side 1 of the record. Coming up next, we've got Chunga's Revenge. Now, the version of Chunga's Revenge that is on side 2 of the album, it's called the Basement version, which was originally released on this disc, Quadrophiliac. And on that disc, it is 11 minutes and 48 seconds long. On this album, it's about 9.5 minutes long. And there's also a basement jam, which was recorded the same way at the Zappa house in the basement with a quadraphonic setup. Now, the basement music number 2 on this disc is only less than 3 minutes long, but on Funky Nothingness, it comes out to be about 6.5 minutes. Now, taking all of side 2 with Chunga's Revenge and the Basement Jam into perspective, the Basement Jam is kind of like another stretched out part of Chunga's Revenge, and this Chunga's Revenge is not as harder rocking as the version on Chunga's Revenge is. This is more of a laid back version, and for the solos, you've got the head of the song, and then you got Frank going into a long extended solo. And then we've got a very tasty electric piano solo with Ian Underwood. Then Max Bennett takes a break on the bass. And then we get Frank coming back in, stating the theme again on a very hard electric guitar, and then taking the song out. And then the Basement Jam that comes after it, they're just vibing. And it's just, they're gelling as a unit. It's pretty cool. Now, that's the end of the first album, the first 2 sides of the 4 sides of Funky Nothingness. Now we're going to get to side 3. Work With Me, Annie, and Annie Had a Baby are 2 songs that were done by Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. Work With Me, Annie was the first song, and there were a number of answer songs that came out, including Annie Had a Baby. This track melds the 2, and it's a good old 12-bar blues standard. Next, we have the Tommy Vincent Duo number 2. And this is where Ainsley is going off on the drums, improvising like crazy. And Frank is getting the guitar, plugging it in, and, well, I'm going to compare this to like when John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham would get together and just trade off of each other and improvise. It's magic. This goes on for about 6 minutes and 42 seconds. And then it's time for Charlena. Now, the song Charlena was first introduced on the Chunga's Revenge album, sung by Flo and Eddie. And man, they just sing the shit out of that song on this album. It's the last track, and it's 4 minutes long. But this earlier version on this album, on Funky Nothingness, that goes on for 12 minutes and 17 seconds. The version that we are more familiar with, and which also turned up on the Them or Us album, is a version that's not solo heavy. Mostly because on the Chunga's Revenge version, it's more vocal heavy, with Flo and Eddie singing and doing a fantastic job of it. Now, you got some good vocals on this too, with Sugarcane Harris taking the lead vocal. But this version on Funky Nothingness goes into the solos in a much heavier tone. This is a blues album, okay? It's a Zappa album, but it's got lots of blues on it, but great blues solos. After the head of the song is completed and in fleshed out manner, we've got a horn break with Ian Underwood doing the overdubs. And then we've got a violin solo from Sugarcane. And then we got a very tasty guitar solo by Frank. And then we go into a restating of the head instrumentally, and then the end of the song with vocals. That is what gives you this 12.5-minute version of Charlena. Side 4 of the album, or the end of the first CD in the CD set, starts with Khaki Sack, a really nice instrumental, kind of perky. And in this song, you've got two main soloists. You've got Frank on guitar, of course, and Ian Underwood on organ. Now, this was one of the teaser tracks that was on YouTube and Spotify and many other streaming platforms. And great solos. The first time I heard this, I just wasn't that into it, but listened to it again a day later, and I was all over it. Great soloing. And it's just amazing that this stuff has been in the vault for over 50 years. And then to close out the album, or to close out the first disc on a 3-CD set, we've got a previously unreleased track called Twinkle Tits. Now, back in 1982, I got this book called Zappa Log, and it had a list of songs that it was known that Frank had composed, but had not yet released. And I saw that title and I thought, what on earth could that possibly be? And it's an instrumental, a very heavily arranged instrumental. And if you listen to bootleg versions, parts of this song were interspersed with parts of the melodies that became Little House I Used to Live In, which was on Burnt Weenie Sandwich originally. But this song has an arrangement all its own, and it's one amazing way to end this first third of the CD set, or the album, the 2-record set. It starts with Max Bennett on acoustic bass, laying a nice lonely beginning into it. And then you've got Ian Underwood coming in on tack piano with a real nice interplay on it. And after that introduction starts the main theme of the song, almost Calliope-like, or ethnic European in the way it goes. That goes into a section where Sugarcane and Frank are playing off of each other with different... it's not tightly arranged and it's not completely solos, but they're going back and forth, and then eventually it becomes a Frank solo. And then that moves into a Sugarcane Harris solo. And then we have the ending section of the song very tightly arranged to end out the album. Now, if you got the 3 CD set, and personally, I bought both, you saw them. I'm just glad that they got here the day after they were supposed to be here. Because lately, I've been ordering a lot of things for review, and sometimes I have to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get them past the day they were supposed to hit the street date. But this one I got on July the 1st. Anyway, let's talk about these other 2 discs. All 3 of the discs look like this, except it will say disc 1, 2, or 3, depending on which one you pull out. And of course, there is a very comprehensive booklet, as well as very well-documented liner notes by the one and only Joe Travers, the Vaultmeister, who did one hell of a job putting this album together. He had to find bits and pieces because since this album had not been released regularly, the main tapes of this album were chopped up and used for different things throughout Zappa's career. And these things had to be reassembled. Some of these things were mixed by Frank, some of them were not. And the archaeological talents of Joe Travers are very much in play here. Now, disc 2 starts with take 5 of Chunga's Revenge. And this version is a lot heavier than the version that's on the first disc. And it's a lot more like the version that ended up on the Chunga's Revenge album, right here. To reference it from the booklet, Sugarcane plays organ. Sections of Frank Zappa's guitar solo from this take were edited into the master version released on Chunga's Revenge in 1970. And it's the same with the version that's on the third disc, which we will get to a little bit later. Then we've got a little bit longer take of Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild. It's take 4, a 16-track master. Then we go into the unedited master of Transylvania Boogie. Now, a lot of you will know Transylvania Boogie as the first track on Chunga's Revenge. And it's 5 minutes long. But here, you've got the unedited, unexpurgated whole thing. It is 18 minutes and 13 seconds. And oh man, it's a motherfucker. It's wonderful. So if you're a fan of Transylvania Boogie, fasten your seatbelts. It's gonna be a wild ride. Then we've got an unedited master of Charlena, which is take 3. It's got a different vocal intro. It's got double-tracked verses and a longer guitar solo than the version of this that was on the Lost Episodes CD. Next on the disc, we've got Work With Me, Annie, and Annie Had a Baby. But this is a different edit of that same song, which includes a solo by Ian Underwood that was left out of the version that's on the album. Ending disc 2, we've got a false start of Twinkle Tits, as well as a full take 2 of Twinkle Tits, which is 13 minutes long, as opposed to the 11.5-minute version that's on the main album portion. And yeah, it's worth listening to this version too. Again, it's different. Trust me, it is. And it's wonderful. Now let's go to disc 3 of the set, which is entitled, well, both of disc 2 and 3 are entitled Zappa Hot Rats 70, because this was known as the Hot Rats Band. They did play a few gigs that are on bootlegs, of course. But disc 3 starts out with a little thing that ended up on Chunga's Revenge called The Clap. That was only a minute long on Chunga's Revenge. But here you've got 11.5 minutes of the first part and 4.5 minutes of the second part. And this is Frank Zappa overdubbed on nothing but percussion. Yeah, that's right. He plays drum set, wood blocks, temple blocks, boobams, tom-toms, and etc. Taken from the liner notes of Chunga's Revenge. Now, I've been living with the 1-minute track of The Clap for decades. And when you listen to it and you know that it's Frank playing all the drums, you can tell that Frank is not that good of a drummer. Sorry for anybody who thinks differently. Frank started out as a drummer, he loves percussion, and he does some very interesting things, but he's not that good of a drummer. But yet, when somebody told me that I would be able to listen to almost 20 minutes of Frank improvising on multi-track drums, I'd put my lobster bib on and say, yes, please. And the version that ended up on Chunga's Revenge is mostly taken from the part 2 of the 2 Clap versions that are on this CD set. So, yeah, it's not the best thing on the set, but did I love it? Yeah, I did. And you want to know what I loved even more? What comes next? The Tommy Vincent Duo Unedited Master. Boom, right there. And it goes on for 21 minutes and 53 seconds. Now, as I've stated before, this is Ainsley Dunbar on drums and Frank improvising in the studio. At the beginning of this, Frank is playing bass. And the two are going at it. And then Frank puts down the bass, Ainsley keeps going on the drums, and then plugs a guitar into the same amp. At least that's what it sounds like. Because this guitar sound has a very fat bottom end. And the feedback comes in, and this is an unedited, unexpurgated version of what's on the album. And this has got to be one of my favorite things about the whole 3 CD set. Just because you listen to Frank doing his improvised drums, it's interesting, but as soon as the first hits of Ainsley on that drum set, you know that a rhythmic master is taken over on the skins. Now, if that weren't enough wonderfulness, right after the Tommy Vincent Duo, we've got a 20-minute version of Chunga's Revenge. This is take 8 from March 1970, and it says that most of the source from the issued album version comes from this take. And, you know, sit back with something refreshing to drink and take in this version of Chunga's Revenge. The order of the solos goes as follows. First there's the head of the song, nice and loud and hard like the one on Chunga's Revenge, the album. Then Ian Underwood puts in a wicked, nasty, wah-wah pedal saxophone solo in there. That goes into Sugarcane Harris doing an organ solo, and then Frank kicks in with a long, heavy guitar solo, loudly distorted, and then he pulls back a bit. The band gets quiet, and he does some real pretty stuff soloing over. So it's like that's the clean part of the solo after the dirty part. And then our friend Mr. Dunbar takes over on drums, does a solo, grinds everything to a halt, and then we've got the main melody of the song, the tail of the song going through with a long, drawn-out ending that is just getting everybody down and nasty as they should for this very, very bluesy, long take of Chunga's Revenge. And then, to finish out the disc and the entire set, we've got 3 little nuggets. The first one is called Halos and Arrows. Whilst listening to the tapes that make up this album, there was something that, when it was recorded, Frank apparently didn't want to keep. It was a multi-tracked guitar improvisation. And who knows how long it went for, but it's beautiful. Check it out. It's Frank on acoustic guitars and bass, and there's a little bit of electrica in there as well. And it plays for 3 minutes off of this 8-track master. So they didn't have a title for it, so Vaultmeister Joe Travers asked Amit, what kind of a title should we give this? And Amit called it Halos and Arrows, which is kind of awesome considering that the names of Amit's 2 children are Halo and Arrow. Check it out. You'll be glad you did. Then there is something called Moldred. This is Frank putting together segments of the duos of him and Ainsley, the Tommy Vincent duo, and adding some bass onto it and creating a whole new composition. And ending this entire package on the CD, as if to put bookends on the whole thing, because you had Funky Nothingness at the beginning from that 1967 session with the earlier Mothers around Uncle Meat era. You've got the same guys with a much faster bluesy shuffle to finish out the album. And this one's only 46 seconds long, but man, as I've been alluding to this entire video, this is a very different Zappa album, a very different Zappa box set. We usually get a retrospective of an album or some unreleased concerts. This is all studio stuff that's pretty much unreleased in this form. And a lot of stuff that let me just put it this way. If you enjoyed a lot of the long jamming that was on this boxed set, the Hot Rat sessions, you're going to love Funky Nothingness, the 3 CD set, just as much. I mean, it's a shame that that's not on vinyl, but that would be a 6 record set and be out of the price range of a lot of us. I'm just thankful that we have the good stuff that's on the 2 record set of Funky Nothingness. This sounds wonderful. this sounds pretty damn good as well, especially if you listen to it directly off of the CD and you don't make an MP3 version of it for your phone or something like that. This is sit down and listen to it, digest it, dig it. You're going to love it. This is Zappa plays the blues in a very Zappa way. It's more Zappa than blues. And once again, Joe and Amit, they've hit it out of the park. Who knows what's going to come up later on this year and in the future with more and more and more of these Zappa reissues. We love them. Don't stop making them. Keep that secret sauce stirring around. So that's my assessment of Funky Nothingness. I hope you feel the same way. Put your comments down below. I've already seen some people that say that, this is no good. But I really don't think that they've put in the time to really appreciate this record. When I first started listening to bits and pieces of it, it was like, okay, that's all right. But when I sat down and digested the whole thing, I just love it that much more. This is not going to go on to the shelf. It's going to be going back on the turntable and back in the CD player many, many times before I give it a break and go and listen to something else. So that's it. I had a great time. I hope you did too. And if you liked what you saw here, please like, subscribe, and come back for more, because you know I'll be doing more. Have a great day, everybody. Go listen to some Zappa music. Now, before I go listen to Funky Nothingness again, I got to spin this, just do a little bit of comparison.